I'm gonna wait one more minute. Let me double check on. Great, and we're live. Hello, welcome to this Innovate live session. My name is Jenny Luna, and I am a digital content creator focusing mostly on podcasts. So I'm really excited today to share more with you about podcasting and knowing how and when to use a podcast to meet your educational goals. First, I want to tell you a little bit about myself. I am the producer of a few shows, namely one called Think Fast, Talk Smart. I want to play a short clip so you get a little bit of an idea of what this show is all about. What I'm going to play for you is a communications podcast from Stanford Graduate School of Business. It's hosted by a lecturer, Matt Abrahams. And in this episode, he's interviewing Seema Yasmin from the Stanford School of Medicine. I'm going to play a quick bit so you guys can hear more from Think Fast, Talk Smart.
Hi. When I've seen you teach, you really are empathetic. Much of your work focuses on communication in healthcare or about healthcare topics. What lessons do you teach healthcare professionals like doctors and nurses? And can you relate those lessons to those of us outside of healthcare?
I remind them, I would say. I suggest, guide, and remind that you don't know it all. And that might sound really simple, but it's quite humbling and sometimes difficult for people to hear, and that they will walk into the room that I am in with their arms crossed.
Mhm.
And sometimes will even say, I just don't think there's anything else you could teach me about communication. And they have decades on me sometimes, and they do know things that I don't know, but they need a reminder that there's new evidence on communications, or there are just some better strategies out there that they might use. So that's one of the things that I am reminding people of.
We all suffer from that curse of knowledge, and it can be threatening to realize that we don't know everything. Oftentimes, healthcare professionals are in a position to be encouraging attitude and behaviors in people who might not want to take them on. For example,
No, that never happens.
No, I
Laura.
know. No, I'm
Life
sure.
is just easy.
Yeah, I mean, eat less or eat differently, exercise more. Can you provide some insight into how we can motivate people to do things that they may not want to do or feel capable of doing?
Yeah, behave.
Okay, so that's a little bit of a taste of the podcast Think Fast, Talk Smart. We'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. So my background is in journalism. I worked traditionally as a reporter. I went to Columbia Journalism School and then worked at a magazine in San Francisco. I got really into podcasting then, and I worked on a food politics podcast and did some work in public radio. So that was a great transition when I came to higher education, went to the Stanford Graduate School of Business. I wanted to use podcasting to teach and to further our messaging goals as a communications department. Now, I talk with people all the time about podcasts because I think it seems like everybody nowadays wants to make a podcast. So I will say that there are about 100 podcasts born every single day. So the market is pretty saturated. When I talk to people about podcasting, I really want to think about why this needs to be a podcast. I'm going to come back to this slide in a minute, but going forward, why does this thing have to be a podcast? Could it be a newsletter? Could it be a blog? Could it be a short video series? Could it be a social media channel? We really want to think about why audio is the perfect medium to do the messaging that we need to do. So the second part that I always like to advise people with any sort of communication, whether it's a podcast or Instagram post, is to know your audience. So when we're thinking about making our podcast, we not only want to think about, oh, it's for nurses. It's for nurses who are trying to further their education. I always advise people to go as granular as possible in your podcast. So My nurse is Stacy. She lives in Omaha, Nebraska. She's 44 years old. She has 3 kids, and she's trying to move from a hospital setting to public health administration, for example. Creating a persona for who you're trying to reach can really, really help drive all the content that you're making for your podcast. My other big piece of advice here on the left is to listen to a variety of podcasts. So, if you're thinking about making a podcast or you're already making a podcast, see what else is out there. Who's doing something that you like? Who's doing something that you want to take and steal from, but maybe tweak slightly? So, really getting a lay of the land of who's podcasting in the spaces where you are. So again, when you're thinking about making a podcast, what information are you hoping to share, teach, or disseminate? And what is your overarching goal for the podcast? We talked a little bit already about making a persona, but what can your podcast do that others can't? So using the example of Think Fast, Talk Smart, we wanted to make a podcast that was all about teaching communication techniques by having experts who had researched communication on the show. And at the end of every episode, listeners should be able to walk away with a learning, a tip, or a technique that they can take and put in their toolkit, whether they're going to negotiate for a raise or they're going to give critical feedback to an employee. We made very clear goals of what the podcast was going to do and what it wasn't going to do, so that when the listener signs on, they know what they're in for. By the way, I can't see you out there listening, so I'm hoping that you can chime in using the chat function to ask questions. My presentation will not last the whole session, and I would love to make this as fruitful and engaging and helpful to you as possible. So please put your questions in the chat, and then at the end, I'd love to take some of your questions. So if you want to talk more straightforward gear or publishing platforms, that we can really get into the nitty-gritty that's most helpful for you. Another big part of what I do when I'm telling people about podcasts is it's hard. It takes a lot of work. So we want to be really realistic with our time and our resources up front. Here, I'm just going to go through a couple of recommendations when I'm chatting with people about starting a podcast. So one of those is to start with a pilot. So therefore, you're not immediately starting a show and then you're having to put out a show every single week or every 2 weeks in perpetuity. But if you start with a pilot, it helps give you a sense of, okay, I'm going to make 8 episodes. I'm going to see what it takes to make 8 episodes. And then I know how sustainable this production model is that we've created. The next is partnerships and sponsorships. There are probably organizations or groups out there who have similar goals to your own. Is there a way that you can partner with them in order to make your show? Is there a way that they can be a sponsor to you and for the content that you're trying to create? So looking for people who you can partner with is really great. Everyone's looking to put out content, and not everybody knows how to make content. So I think can be really advantageous to find good collaborations with other organizations in order to create the content you're looking to make. Another one is publishing cadence. As I mentioned earlier, 100 podcasts born every single day, and not all of those are continually putting out new shows. Another thing to keep in mind is it can take a podcast 1 to 2 years to really gain traction with an audience. So you are having to produce a lot of episodes. So think about, are you going to come out once a month with a new show, once every 2 weeks, once a week? Personally, I think the sweet spot is once every 2 weeks. Once a month feels like listeners may forget about your show. And I think once a week is quite a tough production to meet. So giving yourself 2 weeks for every episode can be good. That being said, if you are launching a podcast, I always do recommend starting with 3 at the minimum, but 5 ideally fully finished before you hit publish, So that way you buy yourself time as each one comes out. They're actually already finished and fully produced. Again, just want to remind you guys to put any questions that you have in the chat to make sure that I can address whatever things are on your mind. Where to publish. So this is another thing when we're thinking about making podcasts is it going to have a landing page? Will each episode have its own website or landing page? Thinking about where your podcast is housed. Another question that comes up a lot nowadays is YouTube versus podcasts. So what we're finding is more and more people don't really care. And whether they're listening on Apple or whether they're watching just a picture with a WAV file on YouTube, that's a podcast to listeners. So they're really agnostic about where they're finding your content. Doesn't really matter to them. So for us as content creators, that means we need to be everywhere that they are. So I recommend making sure that your podcast can be on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. Again, you don't need to necessarily have video, but putting the file up onto YouTube can really help you reach a lot of listeners that you wouldn't otherwise reach. Another thing to think about as we're talking about time and resources is everything that accompanies this audio file. So you have, let's say, an interview, or you have a short teaching piece in audio format. That's going to have a lot of trappings that come with it. For example, titles, subtitles, a little bit of text that goes on the website or is in what we call show notes. So those all take time. You have to build a style for how you want to write those. Will they have hyperlinks? How will you do people's titles? How will you reference other podcasts or research? So these are all questions you want to think about, that it's not just the audio file, but all the things that come in the package with it. Another note on that is art. How will your show be visually represented? Because as I'm sure you've listened to podcasts, you'll see that there's the logo that goes with every single episode. So will different episodes have a different logo, or will it be the same throughout? For podcasts I work on, we've done both. So there's a lot of lead time if the art is going to change per episode. If it's the same logo, you want to make sure that that art logo has, if you have an affiliation again, or a sponsorship or a partnership, you have the correct university affiliation, or you have the correct and updated logo, you have brand colors. That's a really important thing to think about when you're starting to think about a podcast. And dissemination and marketing. So that's a big one. You'll want to think about ways that the podcast will get out into the world. You'll want to think about social media channels you can partner with, or newsletters you can partner with, in order to let people know that this podcast is out and you're going to learn X, Y, and Z when you listen to it. And this is why it's worth your time. So we want to spend a lot of time on dissemination and marketing once we know that we have a good product that the world is going to want to listen to. So I recommend kind of going back to the idea of partnerships and sponsors, collaborating with people and saying, can you put an episode of my new podcast on your show? And we'll put an episode of your podcast on our show. So really helping cross promote in any way you can to let people know about this new podcast. And finally, I also like to tell people that there are no rules. That is something that we've come up to again and again with the work that I do is, oh, well, we did it this way in episode 1, so we have to follow that same format in episode 7. Not true. We have this host for episode 1, 2, and 3. That has to be the same host throughout every episode. Not true. Audio is such an intimate medium. And so you can really just be frank with the people you are making the content for. And you can come on the mic and you say, hey listeners, we did it a certain way last week, but we're going to try this week. Let us know what you think. I like to think about audio as being intimate because it's sort of like you're on the phone. When we're listening, we have someone in our ear the same way that when we're having a phone conversation. And so again, you really have a lot more permission to connect with the audience in a different way. So when you are thinking of making changes, you can just bring your audience along for the ride, and you can always ask them for feedback. Spotify has options to do that. YouTube has options to do that. You can open it up and say, let us know what you think. We are making this for you. We want to know how to best serve you. Let us know in the comments or drop us a line. The other thing I wanted to share is that, podcasting is great for teaching because it is sort of like someone in front of a classroom. It's just one person telling another about information. So whether you choose to make content that is interview based or storytelling based, or just one person sharing their message, I think podcasting is a really great way to do that. It doesn't take a lot of the bells and the whistles and the production that video does, but it can be much more intimate and exciting than a written piece of content. And I think it's a great, exciting new medium. So if you do have questions, I would love to hear from you. I left some time for the Q&A here. Okay, I see one here. Do you have a thought on length of episodes or segment? This is a great question, and I get this a lot. I like to say the typical commute time. So if you're in the Bay Area, that's like an hour, but I don't think it's like that in the rest of the world. So I really do think 20 minutes is sort of a sweet spot. That's just based on my experience. But I have heard a lot of people say, as long as it needs to be. If it's a fascinating conversation or there's a lot of learnings packed in, I think 45 minutes to an hour can be really interesting. I'm sure you've heard of Huberman Lab. Those episodes can be upwards of 2.5 hours, and people listen all the way through because they are interested in the content. So I do think that it really, as long as it needs to be, although for a lot of my shows, we don't like to go over 26 minutes. Okay, and I see another question here that says, how do you determine going forward that a person is really going to be able to grind it out for the long term if you have success? If it's one thing to make a handful, but it might be, yes. Okay, so how do you know really if you want to do it for a year or so? So that kind of goes back to the idea of a pilot, really saying, we did this recently for a podcast at the Graduate School of Business. We're going to do 13 episodes and we're going to see how it goes and we're going to see how the production goes. And that will determine if we can do season 1. So being able, I think that also helps stakeholders get on board. When you use the term pilot, everybody realizes like this is a practice round. We're just going to try it. And then you can kind of document along the way. This is what worked, this is what didn't, and this is what we would do differently. And I think that can really inform going forward. My other really big piece of advice is hire an agency. If you have the budget, I think hiring at the very least a sound engineer who can be making those edits to the audio is an absolute must. And then if you have a little bit more budget, hiring a production agency who can really sort of craft each episode and then help promote and publish each episode. Happy to send recommendations of agencies I've worked with if anyone is interested. How do you feel about scripting for medical topics? SMEs tend to want to read from a script. Yes, this is really interesting. Some people, I don't know if you've heard of the podcast Death, Sex, and Money with Anna Sale. It's a great podcast. That host is able to seem like she's completely speaking off the cuff, but she's reading off of a script. So I think a script can be possible, but I think it's really, really hard to get away from people just reading the script. Same with slides, right? They always say, don't just read your slide deck when presenting. So this also comes to great presenters, great hosts, great teachers that you can capture audio from. They're going to do great when they have that experience teaching in front of someone. They don't read when they're teaching, but they're probably going to be really great on mic if they're really great in front of a classroom. So I do say get as much off of a script as you can, because people can hear that in the audio and it can end up sounding a little robotic if it comes through as read. What is your view on video podcasting? Do you feel it reaps the same rewards as an audio podcast? This question is near and dear to my heart because I am like an audio radio person at my core, and I hate, honestly, that video has come into the space so much. I love This American Life and, Radio Lab and these highly produced audio experiences. And I'm not really a fan that now we just watch two people talk to each other on mics. I see the benefit of it, and we are doing that with Think Fast, Talk Smart as well. So I think a few things. Video podcasting is great because you can reach more audience and it can keep people engaged. And that's sort of just the way the industry is going. But what's really hard for us as creators is it kind of creates two work streams, because the audio cuts that I make to have a 50-minute conversation become 20 minutes are much different, because I can't really make all those same edits and those cuts in video. So I'm now having to have two different work streams, which means more resourcing, more time, more dollars. But we also don't want to be left out of the conversation. So right now with Think Fast, Talk Smart, we're doing probably 25% video, but the big players like Spotify and Apple, they're pushing for video. So we will probably try to meet them in the middle and do more and more video where we can. All right. I think we're coming close to time. If you do have any more questions, you can go ahead and put them in the chat. But again, I think podcasting is a great medium. Hire agencies, hire help. Radio people are out there and they're freelancing and they do great work. So if you do have the resources, I would say get an audio professional who can help you cut tape, as they say, and offer edits. I'm sure with a lot of the professionals you work with, again, could be great on mic because they're so used to speaking in front of people and teaching. And we're all on the move today. We're trying to get things done as we wash our dishes and walk our dog and commute. So podcasting can really be this great way to share information while people are out in the world doing the things they love to do. All right.
Great.
Have a wonderful rest of your conference, and thank you so much for tuning in.
Thank you, Jenny. Thank you, everybody, for attending. And we'll see you at other sessions later this afternoon. Thanks.